Number 1.
Trudy was last seen in Moline, Illinois on August 21, 1996. On the morning of her disappearance, her father, Dennis Appleby, left for work at 9 a.m. At some point between 9:30 a.m. and 10:30 a.m., Trudy was observed getting into an unidentified vehicle driven by a still unknown male in the driveway of her home. She was seen doing this by one of her neighbors. The man was described as being Caucasian and appeared to be in his 20s in 1996. He had curly brown or black hair which was worn long to his shoulders, and he was wearing a baseball cap on his head at the time. Trudy was never seen or heard from again after this. Dennis reported her disappearance when he arrived home from work to find her gone. Investigators initially treated Trudy's case as that of a runaway, but this theory has now been discounted. Trudy brought a towel and a bathing suit with her when she disappeared. She also left behind $200 at home. Dennis stated she was saving the money up for an upcoming vacation they were taking. She is now presumed to have been abducted, and the man she was seen getting into the car with is the primary suspect in her abduction. His identity has not been established nor confirmed. The car the abductor was driving is described as being a silver or gray four-door box-styled vehicle. It was described as being similar to a Chevrolet Celebrity. Trudy's family believes she knew her abductor personally. Her family's residence was located off the main road and was not visible from the street. Extensive searches of the area turned up no sign of Trudy. While her family has held out hope for her return, investigators have noted it's unlikely Trudy is still alive in recent times. For many years, investigators had no suspects in Trudy's abduction. In August of 2017, over 20 years after Trudy disappeared, investigators named William Ed Smith as the primary suspect in her abduction. Smith knew Trudy at the time of her 1996 disappearance, since he was friends with her father. Investigators have stated evidence uncovered in the investigation shows that Trudy was with Smith on the day of her abduction. A witness, David Whipple, claimed he saw Smith with Appleby near his residence in the late morning hours. According to Whipple, he saw Smith in a late-model Chevrolet four-door near his own residence on Campbell's Island. Whipple said he observed Trudy in the passenger seat of the car and that he saw Smith retrieve some life jackets and leave. Smith was reportedly seen that afternoon, but was alone and didn't have Trudy with him at the time. Whipple claimed he didn't come forward with this information sooner because Smith threatened him about it. The car that Smith was driving was scrapped within a week of Trudy's disappearance. Dennis always believed Smith was somehow involved in Trudy's disappearance. He stated that in the days before her disappearance, Trudy asked to go swimming with a friend at Campbell's Island, but he said no. It's possible she went through with her plans anyways. Dennis believes his daughter got into a boat and that Smith along with others attempted to do funny things with Trudy while on the Mississippi River. Dennis said Trudy would have tried to fight back as it was in her nature. He believes an accident or an intentional act occurred on the boat which caused Trudy's death. Dennis believes whatever happened occurred on the east side of Campbell's Island, since that's where Smith hung out. Investigators believe more people are aware of what happened to Trudy and aren't coming forward. David Whipple has refused to cooperate with police in regards to Trudy's disappearance. Dennis believes he was likely also involved in Trudy's demise. David was Smith's son-in-law in 1996 and reportedly lived across the street from him. Trudy knew Whipple and was good friends with his children. She often accompanied his family out on the boat. In August of 2020, investigators named David Whipple and another man, Jameson Fisher, as persons of interest in Trudy's abduction. Jameson is a longtime friend of the Smith family. Investigators have alleged that both men know what happened to Trudy and have been covering up the truth for the past 20 years. In 2019, investigators were able to locate Smith's boat in Dubuque, Iowa, and have been testing it ever since to find any trace of Trudy. They have stated that a recent buccal swab from the boat is promising, but it's unknown what's resulted from the tests. Police are urging anyone who know about the three men and Trudy to please come forward. Anyone who may have seen suspicious activity on Campbell's Island, the boat launch at Empire Park in East Moline, and the Mississippi River islands of Blackbird and Dynamite, are asked to call the police. Smith passed away on December 23, 2014. He was never charged with any wrongdoing in Trudy's case before that. At the time of her disappearance, Trudy was described as friendly, outgoing, loving, and very bright. She often hung out with her friends she made in her neighborhood. She was excited about the upcoming school year. Her family holds a yearly vigil for her to bring awareness to her disappearance. Trudy's case remains unsolved and she's never been located.
Number 2.
Janina Maria Colana Aponte and John Janet Colana Aponte Jr. were last seen alive on May 4, 1974 after 7:30 p.m. in Laquilla, Puerto Rico. Their cases were entered in NamUs in 2010. There is hardly anything online about these siblings. I hope that by posting this, we can get their cases back into the spotlights. Janina Maria Colana Aponte, born April 19, 1963, was 11 when she went missing. Together with her brother, John Kalana Aponte Jr., born February 19, 1962, who was then 12 years old, she left home to go to the beach. They were supposed to meet a friend of the family and his 3 children. Later, when their mother came for them, the friend said her children were not with him. I trust the authorities questioned this man and eliminated him as a suspect. Janina has black hair, black eyes, a small birthmark on her right cheek. There are no dental records, no DNA, and no fingerprints on file. John has black hair and brown eyes. There are no dental records, no DNA, and no fingerprints on file. As the parents' DNA is available, this should be corrected ASAP. There is speculation that the children were kidnapped for ransom. The number $72000 is mentioned online. 8 months after the children disappeared, a man named Thomas Rodriguez committed suicide in Florida. He left a note. He claimed to have been involved in this case. $72000 is an odd number to demand for 2 children. $36000 per child. Is there a possibility that the number reflects something such as the sum on a bank or savings account statement someone saw? I think that, if someone picks a random ransom sum, they'd ask for $75000. Was the mother from a wealthy family? On the blog from the Charlie Project, I found this information about paternity tests from the children. I don't think that matters. What matters is what the man who raised them represents, if you wish to follow the kidnapping theory. Who was John Kalana, who died in 1982? Was he a man who had enemies? Was he involved in a particular line of work? I think if we wish to go with kidnapping, he's the first one to research. Not as a suspect, but as a start, to check the network of people who could have done this, and then see if Thomas Rodriguez has any connections to that network. Nobody was ever arrested in this case. The children were never found. If you have any information about Janina and John Kalana Aponte, please contact the Puerto Rico State Clearinghouse at 787-729-2457.
Number 3.
Dessie was last seen in Glendora, California on March 29, 1996. She was last known to be at her home after her mother, Cheryl Peters, left for work. She disappeared at some point while at her house by herself and was never seen or heard from again. Investigators initially believed she was a runaway. Cheryl also believed her daughter was runaway and hoped for her safe return for years after her disappearance. Authorities at the time believed Jessie had remained in the local area after her disappearance and that she may have been traveling with an adult male companion. Investigators no longer believe she left on her own accord. Jessie didn't take any clothing or personal possessions when she disappeared, and there's been no indication as to her whereabouts since 1996. Investigators now suspect that Jessie was abducted, raped, and murdered on the day of her disappearance. The classification of her case was changed to endangered missing in the early 2000s. Investigators believe Jessie was killed by Janine Marie Snyder and Michael Forrest Thornton, who have been dubbed as the Beauty Killers. Thornton had an obsession with teenage girls and would use Snyder and her trusting nature to lure their victims. Snyder met Thornton after she ran away from her home when she was 13 or 14. Thornton was in his 30s when he met Snyder. Snyder eventually became Thornton's lover and a part-time stripper in Las Vegas, Nevada. She maintained her residence with Thornton back in California. Evidence collected in the investigation into the pair and their victims suggested that the two likes having sexual intercourse with a third party, and particularly young teenage girls. In 2000, the two were arrested after a 14-year-old girl claimed she was held against her will by both Thornton and Snyder in their home for 30 days. They were initially charged with the alleged crime, but whatever charges they faced were dropped due to lack of evidence. She is believed to be their second victim. On April 4, 2001, 16-year-old Michelle Leanne Curran disappeared from her neighborhood as she walked to school in Las Vegas, Nevada. Snyder and Thornton allegedly kidnapped Curran against her will and held her captive for 14 days while sexually exploiting her. She was killed after that. Her body was discovered on April 22, 2001 on a farm property in Rubidoux, California. An autopsy found that she was raped, tortured, and killed by a single gunshot to the head. She was killed on April 17. Her body was found stuffed in a horse staple. Snyder and Thornton were arrested after the owner of the property saw them running from the staples. The pair were arrested and their bond set at $1 million after police found a significant amount of blood in the farm. Curran's remains were not discovered initially. The suspects were both charged with murder in connection to Curran's brutal slaying. When investigators were looking into Curran's murder, they heard about another girl who was killed by the pair. The rumor said the girl's mother worked for Thornton at one point. Jessie's mother worked for Thornton at his chain of salons called The Fix. On the day Jessie went missing, Cheryl quit out of anger and left. Cheryl returned home where Jessie was, and the house was scoped out by Janine and Thornton. They saw Jessie and Thornton made Snyder approach the home and try to lure Jessie away. She was unsuccessful the first time since Cheryl was still at the home at that time. When Cheryl left for another job, she tried again. Janine managed to lure Jessie away from her home under false pretenses and into Thornton's vehicle. Jessie could not escape as she was held at knife point. They took her to Lake Arrowhead, where they handcuffed her to a bed. Thornton raped Jessie as Janine watched. Thornton and Snyder killed Jessie by drowning her in a bathtub. Thornton's wife remembers him telling her to go into the bedroom and don't come out whatever you hear. She reported hearing thumping sounds coming from the bathroom. She also recalls how the pair discussed keeping the girl's body parts in coolers. They also discussed how to dispose of the body. Snyder and Thornton allegedly bragged about the crime as well, and said stuff such as how Jessie's mother would react to coming home, only to see she isn't there. During the trial's penalty phase, a psychiatric expert who studied Snyder testified that Snyder confessed to killing Jessie. Snyder stated that after Jessie's death, her and Thornton dismembered her remains and threw them off Dana Point and into the Pacific Ocean. Snyder and Thornton were sentenced to death for Curran slaying and are awaiting execution. They have not been criminally charged in Jessie's murder. At the time of her disappearance, Jessie was described as a kind and religious teenager. She loved flowers, animals, and school. She attended various schools in California and New York and was raised by her aunts until she was 12. She went to live with her mother and older brother, Robert, when she was 12 years old. Her family was devastated by her disappearance and hoped for so long that she was alive. They have since held a memorial service for her. Jessie's remains have never been found, but foul play is suspected in her case. In 2010, a book was written about the killers, and it talked about the cases they have been linked to, including Jessie's.
Number 4.
Tracy was last seen in San Rafael, California on April 27, 1973. She reportedly left her home located in the Bermuda Palms Motel in the 700 block of San Francisco Boulevard. She left at 11 a.m. and was heading for school. Tracy never arrived to school for her classes and was never seen or heard from again. Tracy's family realized she was missing when she didn't return home from school that evening. They reported her as missing the next day to the police. More than 50 police officers and scout explorers searched the area and others for her with no result. Investigators are unsure if Tracy's disappearance was a kidnapping or something else. A few weeks after Tracy went missing, a woman reported that she observed a dark-colored vehicle following the child as she walked to school on Canal Street. The woman stated she saw the car and Tracy as she returned home from shopping. She said she didn't see the car or Tracy pass her house after that. The car was described as being black or dark green. It was possibly a sedan or a Rambler, and the driver of the car was described as an African-American man with black bushy hair and a pointed beard. The man was allegedly accompanied by several other men who were all described as being African-American. The woman doesn't know if the men kidnapped Tracy and felt she would have heard the child scream if she was forced into the vehicle. Tracy's parents were asked if they knew the men in the car, to which they said they didn't. The car was never located and the men remain unidentified. Despite the witness account, police have no suspects in Tracy's disappearance. There was once a false report that Tracy had been found safely, but this is not true, and she remains missing. There was a consistent rumor that her body was buried in a crawlspace surrounding the pool area of the motel she lived in. Investigators searched the space, but found no trace of Tracy's remains in 2009. They were finally able to put that rumor to rest. At the time of her disappearance, Tracy lived in room 49 at the motel, which was located on 737 E Francisco Boulevard. She was living with her grandmother and other family members at the time since her parents were separated. Tracy was kindergarten student at Bahia Vista School in 1973. Tracy's disappearance remains unsolved. She is missing under suspicious circumstances.
Number 5.
Anthony was last seen in Anacortes, Washington with his two friends, Mitchell Zimmy and Keith Humanick, on January 25, 1986. They went out on the ocean on a homemade 10-foot aluminum white skiff. The three of them were last seen near Fidalgo Island. They were only meant to be gone for about an hour, but none of them ever returned to shore and were never seen or heard from again. The boys did not take any equipment with them like camping gear. They were intending to head for Young Island. It's unknown if they were going fishing or possibly exploring. After the boys were reported missing, searchers found one of the skiff's oars on the southern side of Burroughs Island, and this would be the only trace of the boys that would ever be found. Keith, Anthony, and Mitchell are believed to have drowned. The United States Coast Guard searched for the boys until January 29. The boys were all juniors in high school at the time of their disappearances. Their cases remain unsolved.